You're from the paper era, Caleb. This company doesn't need old school engineers slowing us down.
The last person who tried to outpace experience ended up rebuilding everything I warned them about.
The conveyors had stopped mid-cycle. The air inside Agrion nutrient systems hung thick with the smell of burnt feed and failure. Red lights pulsed along the rafters, blinking a steady warning, data source unavailable. The hum that had filled this place for decades was gone, replaced by the soft crackle of silence. I stood in the center of the production floor, boots echoing against cold concrete, watching a single auger wheel twitch once, then die. Dust floated through a shaft of pale morning light. Settling over a nameplate half bolted to the wall, Caleb Drayton, Systems Architect. The letters were rusted now, the metal pitted from years of steam and neglect. Beneath it, half buried under a thin layer of powdered corn, lay a scorched fragment of Plastic Employee of the Year, 2009. I bent down, brushed the ash from its surface, and turned it over in my hand. The corner melted inward like the memory itself trying to hide. I smiled, not kindly. "It's funny," I said to no one, "how they honor you before they erase you. If you've ever watched something you built fall silent like this, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if stories like these hit a little too close to home, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to uncover, and it's only just beginning." Outside, the wind carried the distant clang of loose sheet metal, a sound like applause from ghosts. The building seemed to breathe once, a deep mechanical sigh, as if realizing it had finally outlived its makers, somewhere above. A monitor flickered back to life, stuttering through static before landing on a single frozen line of tech system owner, Drayton Systems LLC. I stared at it for a long time, long enough for the red light to catch the edge of my badge and throw a faint reflection across the floor. Most people wouldn't have noticed the message. Most wouldn't know that Drayton Systems was more than a name. It was a signature, buried in code, written by a man they thought they'd replaced. The wind slipped through again, rattling a chain hoist and carrying the faint smell of molasses and oil. 6 months ago. These lines were a live feed rolling, screens glowing, voices shouting above the clatter. 6 months ago, the system obeyed. Now, standing in the stillness, I felt the weight of it settle in. This wasn't a malfunction. It was the echo of a decision someone else had made, and the consequence that was finally answering back. The banners in the conference hall read like commandments: automation, minimalism, efficiency. The CEO said them like gospel, pacing in front of a glowing screen that pulsed with corporate optimism. Rows of managers nodded along, faces lit blue by the same recycled slideshow Agrion had been parading since the merger. The words sounded clean, frictionless, the kind of language that forgets machines still need people. Then came Gavin Holt, 29, imported from some coastal MBA farm, freshly tanned and already allergic to humility. He took the mic like he was auditioning for a documentary about innovation, flashed his last name like a badge of inherited genius, and announced himself as Director of Operational Efficiency. The room clapped too long, partly because he was the CFO's son, partly because no one knew what that title meant. He turned toward me near the back of the room, grinned too white for this much fluorescent light. "And to our longtime team members," he said, "we'll be moving past old-school engineering models. No offense. Caleb, I hear you're from the paper era." A few nervous laughs rippled across the table. I didn't give him one. Instead, I lifted my old thermos, poured a splash of coffee into the lid, and let the steam drift between us. The same thermos I'd used for 19 years dented, faded. A gift from the first colleague I ever had here, a man who retired before Agrion rebranded itself into something shinier but emptier. I took a slow sip, tasting burnt grounds and honesty. They called me old school. I thought, but at least my coffee still tastes like work. Gavin clicked to the next slide, full of arrows and buzzwords: data consolidation, cloud synergy, process pruning, the kind of diagram you print when you don't know what a gearbox sounds like. He talked about trimming digital fat, reimagining redundancy, and modernizing safety workflows. Every phrase was a glossy insult. By the time the meeting ended, he'd already sent out a memo: immediate removal of legacy monitoring modules. One of those modules was the system I'd built after the 2016 feed contamination, the one that caught a toxin leak before it reached 300 farms. the one that had kept Agrion's name off every federal recall list since later that afternoon. I passed by the control room and saw Gavin standing over a young process engineer, pointing at my old code on the screen. "Delete this," he said, snapping his fingers. "It clutters the dashboard." The kid hesitated. "Sir, that module cross-checks for feed toxicity levels. It's tied to the regulatory alarms." Gavin laughed, loud and effortless. "The only toxins here are your excuses." He walked out like he'd just solved hunger itself, leaving the engineer pale and silent. I watched from the doorway, hands in my pockets, the taste of bitter coffee still on my tongue. The air smelled of ozone and arrogance, a mix I'd learned to recognize before every corporate disaster. The invitation said, "All hands alignment meeting." But everyone knew what that meant, a public execution disguised as corporate synergy. When I joined the Zoom, there were already 117 little rectangles glowing across the screen, each one a witness pretending to multitask. At the center sat Martin Holt, Agrion's CFO and self-appointed guardian of progress. His smile looked rehearsed, too polished for a man about to humiliate someone on camera. He cleared his throat. "Team, we're here to address a pattern of resistance," he began. "Certain departments have been hesitant to embrace our modernization strategy." He paused, eyes cutting toward my feed. "Caleb, you've been with us a long time, but your recent behavior has created a culture of fear and inflexibility. You've undermined a promising young leader's momentum." He didn't have to say Gavin's name. The camera pinned itself on the golden boy. Anyway, Gavin leaning back in his chair, chin lifted, smirk calibrated for the company newsletter. Martin folded his hands in the spirit of transparency. "I'm asking you to apologize, publicly, so we can move forward together for a second." Even the background noise stopped, no typing, no paper shuffling, just a grid of faces waiting to see how far I'd bend. I unmuted my mic. "Understood." One word, flat, precise, uncolored. Then I muted myself again. No one moved, even through the screen. I could feel the confusion, like the system had expected a different input and froze instead. A senior engineer I'd trained 15 years ago reached for his keyboard, then stopped. His camera clicked off for a moment before the feed went dark. I saw his eyes glisten. He was the same man I'd saved in 2018 when a miscalculated ratio nearly triggered a federal recall. Now he couldn't even look at me. Martin exhaled through his nose, mistaking my silence for compliance. "Good," he said, smiling as if peace had been restored. Gavin nodded, satisfied, and the meeting dissolved into polite goodbyes. When my screen went black, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. No anger, no panic, just the kind of stillness that happens when pain runs out of adjectives. I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a faded photo of our old engineering team, sleeves rolled up, faces shining with pride and grease. Back then, we built things that mattered, systems that worked because people cared. Now those same people bowed their heads and called it progress, somewhere in the office. A faint rhythm echoed through the walls, the distant tapping of keys, slowing down, weaker with every second. I closed my eyes. It didn't sound like typing anymore. It sounded like a heartbeat fading, the heartbeat of a system that didn't know it was already dying. The office was empty by the time I returned. The hallway lights had already switched to motion sensors, casting long, sterile shadows across the linoleum. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sign that anything still worked in this place. I closed the door behind me, and for the first time in 19 years, the click didn't echo against voices, just silence. I sat down at my old desk, the one they hadn't reassigned yet, and powered up the workstation. The login still carried my initials, a small mercy they'd forgotten to erase. Folders blinked to life, one after another, until I reached the archive directory. There it was, a relic from a different century, Drayton Systems LLC, Contract 2004 PDF. I opened it slowly, line by line, the way an archaeologist brushes dirt off a buried artifact. I'd written most of it myself back when Agrion was still a collection of warehouses and good intentions. The header looked ancient, the logo dated, but the language was precise. Mine always was. Then I saw it. Clause 7C. The sentence sat in the middle of the page like a fuse waiting for a match. In the event of forced removal without due cause, contractor retains exclusive rights to derivative safety modules and compliance dashboards. I leaned back, staring at the words until their meaning sank in again. I hadn't touched this file in years, hadn't needed to. But tonight, it read like prophecy. They thought they were erasing a man. What they'd really done was trigger a clause, I whispered to the empty room, almost amused. They called me obsolete, turns out. My contract aged better than their son's. The printer in the corner coughed awake, slow and dusty. I printed the page, let the paper slide out warm into my hand. The ink bled a little along the margins, like the document itself had been waiting too long to breathe. From the drawer, I took out my old red pen, the one I used for audit sign-offs, and drew a clean line beneath the clause. Then, in the same careful handwriting that had built every protocol in this place, I wrote derivative ownership active. I held the paper to the light, watching the red glint like a live circuit. A quiet kind of power moved through me, not revenge, not anger, just recognition. The system they were so proud of still bore my fingerprints. Every safeguard, every feed monitor, every redundancy loop, all mine by design. And now, once again, by law. I slid the document into my briefcase, closed the lid, and exhaled. When I stood to leave, the motion lights flickered back on. Somewhere above the doorway, a small camera lens blinked, recording, archiving, time-stamping a silent witness to the moment everything shifted. I didn't see it, but the system did. I started the shutdown on a Thursday night, quietly, the same way I'd built everything here. No alarms, no drama, just a sequence of silent corrections. I called it a graceful exit, though it wasn't really an exit yet. It was a rehearsal for one. The first step was the API handshake. I revoked 3 dormant keys, all registered under my old consulting credentials. They'd been active for 19 years, feeding data between Agrion's production servers and our compliance backend. To anyone else, it looked like routine maintenance. To me, it was the first incision clean, bloodless, invisible. Next came the licenses. I didn't revoke them outright. That would trigger alerts. I simply adjusted the renewal timers, shortening the intervals until they expired naturally. A technical sleight of hand, the kind that makes a system fall asleep before it realizes it's dying. Then, I separated Gavin's shiny new dashboard from the actual data core. He'd been so proud of that dashboard, parading it around like a miracle cure, but it was nothing more than a painted window. Once I severed the link, it would keep refreshing empty air and calling it efficiency. By Friday morning, he was already celebrating. The internal memo went out with his signature line in bold. Our system now runs 40% faster since I cleaned up the old junk. I almost laughed. I stirred my coffee and replied to no one in particular. Efficiency runs faster when it's disconnected from reality. Still, I kept my pace deliberate. Too fast and someone would notice, too slow, and the board might change course. Every command I entered felt surgical, a cut here, a delay there, a password rotation hidden under scheduled maintenance. On the surface, everything looked smoother. Beneath it, the real structure was quietly detaching itself, module by module, like a ship loosening from its dock. At 11:32 p.m., a quiet ping broke through the stillness. One of the diagnostic routines I'd left running in the background had flagged an anomaly-elevated toxin markers in a feed batch awaiting shipment. The automated gate froze the pallets in place. Had the system been in Gavin's control, that detection module would have been gone days ago. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the irony settling in. A protocol I'd disabled to prepare my exit had just saved hundreds of animals, maybe a few farms, from disaster, retribution disguised as protection. I tagged the report, labeled it in calm red text, Incident A14 contained. No email, no announcement. I didn't need credit. I just needed the record to exist, proof that the system still had a conscience, even if its operators didn't. Then I leaned back, shut the monitor off, and listened to the hum of the server room fade into quiet. The lights dimmed, one by one. Everything was working exactly as planned, calm, precise, inevitable. Monday arrived clean and ordinary, the kind of morning that pretends nothing's about to happen. Gavin Holt walked into the Agrion plant at 7:30 sharp, shirt so white it almost glowed under the factory fluorescence. He had that swagger of someone who'd never stayed long enough anywhere to see real dirt. In one hand, a protein shake the color of wet concrete. In the other, a phone already open to his own dashboard metrics. He waved at the receptionist, finger-gunned the security guard, and called out, "Let's make efficiency happen." People. By 7:43 a.m., the first alert hit. Unauthorized credential detected. The words flashed across the top of the monitoring screen in bright red, pulsing every 3 seconds like a heartbeat. The night shift operator frowned, clicked retry, and assumed it was nothing. Agrion ran on warnings, most of them false alarms buried under updates no one ever read. At 7:52, another one appeared, then 3 more. By 8 o'clock, every workstation that relied on cloud authentication was timing out, blinking the same unreadable error, access token mismatch, handshake failed. Gavin didn't notice at first. He was too busy explaining to a visiting investor how his streamlined infrastructure had cut response latency in half. Then someone called his name from the control room. "Sir, the dashboard's not loading." Gavin smirked, the kind of smile he reserved for employees who didn't understand how progress worked. "Refresh it or reboot. It's probably cache." The engineer hesitated. Hit refresh. The screen flickered once, twice, then went completely white. Centered across the empty interface, a single line appeared. "Contact Drayton Systems for authorization," for a full 5 seconds. No one spoke. The silence inside that room was almost physical, like the air had thickened. Then a young technician whispered, "Drayton Systems. Isn't that his old company?" Someone else muttered, "Wasn't it merged years ago?" The supervisor stared at the message, voice dropping to a hush. Apparently not. By 8:12 a.m., the legal department had already flooded the internal chat with red flags: urgent system outage, licensing anomaly, verify contract ownership. Phones rang. Executives pinged each other. A compliance manager began scrolling through archived vendor agreements with shaking hands. Somewhere in that digital maze, the name Caleb Drayton surfaced again for the first time in nearly 2 decades, and while panic metastasized through the building like a chemical spill, I was nowhere near it. I was at home, standing barefoot in my backyard, watering the small row of pepper plants I'd started months ago. The radio on the porch hummed softly between static and weather reports. Then, clear as glass, the announcer's voice cut through. Agrion Nutrient Systems is currently experiencing a major system outage. Sources say operations have been temporarily suspended. I paused, tilted my head toward the sound, and let the hose keep running. One eyebrow lifted. No smile, no triumph, just recognition. Then I turned the knob, shut off the water, and went back inside. By 10:30 a.m., every senior executive at Agrion was crammed into the boardroom, sleeves rolled up and eyes locked on a wall of blank screens. The dashboard that once pulsed with feedline data and safety metrics now displayed nothing but static. Someone had dragged in a spare projector, hoping a backup server might still be alive. It wasn't. The CFO, Martin Holt, stood at the head of the table, voice sharp with panic. "This is a temporary latency issue," he said, pacing. "Cloud servers lag under high volume." He sounded like a man trying to talk over a fire alarm. A junior IT manager cleared his throat. "Sir, it's not latency. The core data table is gone. The validation logs, the batch IDs, everything tied to compliance deleted or unreachable." Silence fell so fast it felt audible. The CEO leaned forward, knuckles whitening around a coffee mug he hadn't touched. "You're telling me we've lost all feed safety records?" The manager nodded slowly. "Every one of them." "Sir," Gavin sat near the window, tie loosened, face shiny with the kind of confidence that was starting to crack. "It's a sync error," he muttered. "We'll reboot, clear cache, reroute the endpoint. It's probably still on a staging node." But when the general counsel opened her laptop and pulled up the licensing log, the room shifted from panic to something colder dread. "Wait," she said, scrolling fast. "These credentials don't belong to Agrion. They're registered to an outside vendor." Martin frowned. "Which vendor?" She turned the screen toward him. The name glowed in pale blue text: Drayton Systems LLC. The CFO's face drained of color. "That can't be right. That company was dissolved years ago." "Apparently not," she replied. Her voice trembled, then hardened. "Clause 7C, I'm reading it now. It's still active." The CEO blinked. "Clause what 7C?" she repeated. "In the event of forced removal without due cause, the contractor retains exclusive rights to derivative systems. Since you terminated Mr. Drayton publicly and without due process, ownership reverted to him." A beat of silence. Then the CEO asked, almost in a whisper, "Can we override the license?" The lawyer looked up, expression flat. "No, we don't own it anymore." The sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Across the table, Gavin stared at the carpet, hands twitching against his laptop keyboard that no longer connected to anything real. The CEO leaned back in his chair, the color leaving his face like air escaping a balloon. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered a prayer from the far end of the room. A finance director muttered under his breath, almost to himself. He built the feed lines. We just renamed them. No one answered. They didn't have to. Every monitor in that room already had flashing the same silent message across their perfect, efficient screens. Contact Drayton Systems for authorization. The email arrived mid-morning, quiet and polite, as if it had wandered into the wrong inbox. From Emily Rowe, CEO's office. Subject: Mason, sorry. Caleb, would you be open to a conversation? The wording made me smile, the way people write when they realize they might have backed the wrong horse. I read it twice, once for tone, once for timing. Then I closed the laptop without replying. Some messages earn silence better than they earn answers. Across town, I could imagine the noise Gavin shouting into phones, trying to sound like he still had authority. Why isn't he answering? He'd bark at IT. Voice cracking through the speaker. Ping his address. Trace the license. I don't care how, just fix it. Fix it. The phrase always amused me. People like him never understood that the system wasn't broken. It was just obeying the last man who truly understood how it worked. The office line rang once, then again, different number, sharper tone. I let it buzz until voicemail picked up. A moment later, my personal phone lit up with a New York area code. Curiosity won that round. Mr. Drayton, a woman's voice said. Smooth, measured, definitely legal. I represent an investment group formerly associated with Agrion. We've reviewed your compliance architecture. It's elegant, sustainable, future-proof. We'd like to discuss an exclusive contract, if you're open to it. I leaned back in the chair, looking out across the small stretch of garden I'd planted behind my house peppers. Basil, a few stubborn tomatoes that refused to die. The wind stirred them gently, brushing the leaves against each other like quiet applause. I appreciate the interest, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But I'm taking a break from building empires for people who mistake loyalty for furniture. She laughed softly. Professional enough not to argue. Then perhaps we can build one for you instead. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, letting the silence fill the space where adrenaline used to live. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same investors who'd once applauded Agrion's modernization were now crawling back to the man they'd erased. I didn't need revenge. The market was already delivering it on schedule, from the open window. The breeze carried the faint sound of traffic and something else, that low hum of a world still turning, still asking to be maintained. I watched the leaves tremble, a single petal breaking free and drifting across the porch. It's funny, I murmured to no one, how silence attracts opportunity. Then I reached for the hose, watered the plants, and let the phone rest face down on the table. The contracts, the panic, the collapse, they'd all find their way back eventually. For now. The system was quiet, and so was I. They called it a promotion, though everyone in the building knew better. By Monday morning, Gavin Holt had been reassigned to Strategic Development Lead, a title that sounded important enough to hide its emptiness. No office, no staff, no system access, just a nameplate outside a conference room that no one used, and an email account that auto-forwarded everything to legal. He showed up anyway, polished shoes squeaking on tile, pretending not to notice the silence that followed him down every hallway. The company memo hit inboxes an hour later. Subject: launching legacy ownership review initiative. It was dressed up in the usual corporate optimism phrases like transparency, compliance modernization, and systemic renewal. I'd seen enough of those buzzwords to know what it really meant: panic disguised as progress. I read it from my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside my laptop, the same line repeated across every department announcement, a kind of forced cheer. We're excited to review the ownership structure of our legacy systems. I chuckled under my breath. They called it a legacy review. I called it Tuesday. Outside, the morning sun hit the glass of my back door, casting grid lines across the floor, a perfect reflection of the diagrams I used to build inside their system. Funny how symmetry follows you, even after you walk away. That afternoon, my attorney called to confirm the paperwork. Agrion had officially re-signed a long-term consulting contract with Drayton Systems, the same firm they'd once buried under 1,000 layers of corporate merger filings. The value was 10 times my former salary, the kind of number they thought could buy back control. You'll want to move the funds soon. My lawyer advised, not yet. I said, let it sit. There was a pause. You're sure completely? I replied. They'll learn more from the waiting than from the payment. I could almost picture it, the boardroom filled with new consultants, scrambling to make sense of systems built before they were out of college. The same executives now pretending they had always respected the architecture they once tried to erase, somewhere in that maze of panic. Gavin was probably still writing memos no one read, convinced his strategic initiatives would bring the company back to life. The truth was simpler. Agrion wasn't rebuilding, it was learning, painfully, who had actually built it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet fill the space between thoughts. The smell of coffee mingled with sunlight and old paper. Vindication didn't roar. It whispered. It sounded like an inbox filling with contracts you didn't have to chase. A silence no one could interrupt. I closed the laptop, left the cup half full, and looked out across the garden. The wind stirred the pepper leaves again, gentle and familiar. For the first time in months, the air felt balanced, not victorious, just right. The morning light came in slow through the cabin windows, soft and pale over the wooden floorboards, outside. The fields stretched quiet and bare where the Agrion plant once stood, acres of silence where engines used to roar. The wind carried the faint smell of molasses and metal, a scent that still lived in my memory even after everything else was gone. I sat at the old oak table, nursing the same dented thermos I'd carried through 19 years of early shifts and midnight audits. The coffee inside had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The thermos had outlasted every rebrand, every meeting, every executive who thought they could rebuild a system by renaming it. It had seen everything: loyalty, collapse, and, eventually, peace. The radio on the counter hummed between static and a calm voice reporting morning updates. Agrion is rebuilding its data structure under new leadership, the announcer said. I smiled faintly. The words new leadership always sounded so temporary. A single tone rang from the distance, the old plant bell, rusted and forgotten, giving one last echo through the valley. I hadn't heard it in years. For a moment, the sound hung in the air like a memory refusing to fade, then slipped away into quiet. I reached for the folder beside me, the half-burned contract, edges blackened, the ink still legible where it mattered. I tore off the remaining page and fed it into the fireplace. The paper curled, darkened, and vanished. The flame danced against the glass, reflecting back in my eyes, not vengeance, not pride, just the calm after a storm that never needed thunder. My phone buzzed once, a message. Emily Rowe. He didn't read the clause. Did he? I typed back one line. No one ever does. For a moment, I watched the cursor blink, then let the phone fall silent again. The cabin was still, save for the faint hum of the old fax machine in the corner. Then it crackled to life, slow, mechanical, deliberate, printing out a single sheet, another contract, another offer, from another investor who'd finally realized the foundation they needed wasn't made of money or youth, but of memory. I didn't stand to read it, instead. I looked toward the window, where the sunrise had turned the fields gold. The world outside looked simple again, stripped of noise, full of balance. They thought removing me would simplify things. I said quietly, turns out, I was the simplification. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with applause. It comes quietly, like light finding its way through a cracked door, calm, steady, and enough. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after someone tried to erase your worth, know this silence doesn't mean surrender, it's preparation. Tell me, where are you listening from today? And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every ending, even the quiet ones, deserves to be heard.